Welcome back to the Deep Dive. I am your host, and today we are pulling on a thread that is, well, it's arguably one of the most chilling and, just frustrating mysteries in modern history. We are talking about the Dyatlov Pass incident of 1959.
Oh, absolutely. This is the ultimate cold case. I mean, literally and figuratively.
Right.
What we're looking at for this deep dive is a group of 9 highly experienced Soviet hikers. These are veterans of the Siberian wilderness.
Yeah.
And they embark on this really challenging, meticulously documented expedition into the northern Urals, and they just vanish.
Yeah. And under circumstances that still, more than half a century later, they just defy any immediate logical explanation.
They really do.
Exactly. And for anyone who's not familiar, this story is. It's the stuff of conspiracy theories, of horror movie premises, endless speculation. So our mission today is really crucial. We're taking the sources you've shared with us, the forensic reports, the diary entries, all the photographic evidence, the official Soviet conclusions, and we are going to try to structure them to move beyond all those sensational claims. We want to find the most logical, evidence-based explanation that puts all these bizarre, contradictory facts together.
Right, into one coherent narrative.
Yeah.
And our focus isn't just on what happened. We also need to understand why the official explanation at the time was so vague.
Yeah.
So cryptic. And also how the real verifiable evidence, I'm talking about the forensic notes, the actual material found at the scene, has been twisted or just ignored over the decades for more dramatic theories.
We want to ground this story back in the reality of what it was, which was a harsh Siberian winter. Okay, so let's unpack this. Let's set the stage for what was supposed to be, a triumph of Soviet youth and endurance. The story begins early morning, January 23rd, 1959. We have a ski and hiking team of 10 people.
8 men and 2 women. All students and graduates from the Ural Polytechnic Institute. And their leader was a 23-year-old engineering student, Igor Dyatlov.
And where are they headed?
Their destination was Mount Otorten. It's a Class 3 route, which for a winter expedition is the most difficult category.
So this was a serious undertaking.
Oh, incredibly serious. Dyatlov was trying to lead his group on this route to get a certification for even more ambitious journeys in the future. And it's so important for you to realize the caliber of this group. They were not novices. They were highly skilled, resilient, and really prepared for extreme weather.
They had maps, they had plans for the cold.
Meticulous organizational discipline. Everything was planned out.
And we have their diaries, which give us this amazing, really intimate look into the beginning of the journey. They're moving deeper into the Siberian taiga, right? They're on a train, then a bus, a truck.
A horse and sleigh at one point.
Yeah.
And then finally, on skis and on foot.
Yeah.
And they documented everything. They wrote about the brutal cold, the snow drifts, the isolation.
It sounds like it started out as you'd expect.
The sources show it did. It progressed exactly as a seasoned trek should. They were joking in their diaries, arguing a little bit over who would wash the dishes, celebrating small milestones.
And the photos.
The photos and the journal entries, they all suggest a normal, if grueling, trek. Lots of snow, bitter cold, and an increasingly tough landscape. And Dyatlov's leadership style, according to the entries, was professional, demanding, but supportive.
And there's that one entry, isn't there? That early one that just it hangs over the whole case.
Yeah, one that asks, I wonder what awaits us on this hike. Will anything new happen?
It's pure dramatic irony. So chilling to read now.
It really is.
Yeah.
But their group of 10 became 9 pretty early on, which, as it turns out, saved one person's life.
Right. On January 28th, one of the hikers, Yuri Yudin, he gets sick.
Yeah, he became quite ill. It was a combination of rheumatism and maybe a minor injury he'd been dealing with.
And he makes the tough call to turn back.
A major disappointment for him, I'm sure, given the prestige of the trip, but it absolutely saved his life. He was the 10th person.
The last person to see the other 9 alive.
And we have photos from right before they parted ways. The group looks confident, ready for the challenge. The 9 continue, and they keep up their meticulous documentation with diaries and multiple cameras.
The sources say the next few days were just a brutal battle against these massive snowdrifts.
Yeah, sometimes they were only making a kilometer or 2 of progress in a full day. It was a real test of their skill and perseverance.
Okay, so let's fast forward to February 1st. This is the last day that we have any documented activity from them.
Correct. They were forced to change their route a bit because the weather was getting worse.
And this took them towards Kholat Syakhl,
which, to the indigenous Mansi people, is known as Dead Mountain.
That name alone just adds a layer of dread to the whole story.
It does. though local Mansi folklore says the name comes from a totally unrelated tragedy from a long, long time ago. But on February 1st, after a really laborious day, they decide to set up camp, but not in the sheltered woods below.
No, they set up on the open slope, just a few hundred meters from the peak.
And that decision is questioned a lot, but the sources seem to indicate they might have done it for practice.
Practice?
Yeah, to practice setting up a camp in true high-altitude, exposed conditions. Or maybe it was just to save time, planning to cross the summit first thing the next day.
And this is where the whole atmosphere of the story, documented in their diaries, it just changes completely.
It does. The very last sentence we have, recovered from the final diary, it sets this chilling tone for the disaster that followed.
What does it say?
It says, "It is difficult to imagine such a comfort on the ridge, with shrill, howling wind, hundreds of kilometers away from human settlements."
That word comfort, it's so clearly sarcastic. It just highlights how hostile that environment was.
Camping on that exposed ridge meant they were now completely vulnerable to what are known as katabatic winds.
What are those? Exactly.
They're powerful, dense, gravity-driven winds that just accelerate down a slope. And they're often accompanied by sudden, really intense snow squalls.
So they were basically betting their survival on their tent holding up.
They were, and then, just silence.
Deafening silence. Dyatlov had promised to send a telegram back to the Institute by February 12th.
And when that date came and went, alarm bells started ringing, but very, very slowly.
And this is where that classic Soviet bureaucracy kind of gets in the way and delays the search.
Oh, absolutely. The friends and relatives, they were worried immediately, but the Institute just dismissed the delay. They figured, the group was just stuck in a blizzard or running behind schedule.
It wasn't until February 20th.
When the relatives really pressured the authorities, that a full-scale search was finally deployed. Military, police, volunteers, everyone.
And that delay is so critical, isn't it? Because it meant that any evidence was just being degraded by the weather for over a week.
Exactly. The search team finally located the camp on the slope on February 26th. The lead searcher immediately radioed back.
And what he said was that it was clear something horrific had occurred.
The state of the camp was just baffling. The tent was partially collapsed, covered by a thin layer of snow. But when they looked inside, they found this massive paradox.
All their belongings, all their essential equipment.
All of it was orderly, placed neatly inside the tent. Sleeping bags were unrolled, food was prepared, cooking utensils set aside. Everything they needed to survive in minus 30-degree weather was there.
And this is the detail that launched 1,000 theories.
The tent itself.
It had been slashed open with a knife from the inside.
And this is the first huge piece of evidence we have to really digest. The sources are definitive on this. The slashes were not from an animal claw or some external force.
No, they're intentionally cut with a sharp object, almost certainly one of their own knives. An emergency exit.
So the question is, why would 9 experienced people in minus 30-degree Celsius weather cut their way out of their only shelter, abandoning all their survival gear?
That is the core paradox. A knife escape implies an immediate internal threat.
But the conditions outside demanded they stay put. It makes no sense.
So how did the sources help us resolve that?
Well, they don't resolve it right away, but they do start building the context. And the evidence of their descent, how they lift the tent, complicates any theory of just a terrified scramble.
Right, the footprints.
The day after they found the tent, the search party was able to track 9 pairs of footprints leading straight down the slope towards the woods, about half a kilometer away.
And the analysis of these footprints is so important, but we need to really understand the significance of that analysis.
The sources say the indentations in the snow were rather mild, which means their pace wasn't frantic.
They weren't running.
No. And crucially, some of the footprints were just socks. Others were bare feet. Some had a boot on one foot. This suggests they descended in a, quote, calm and orderly fashion, as opposed to running away in panic.
They walked away from the tent.
Yes. This strongly suggests that whatever caused the initial panic, it subsided the moment they got out of the tent. It allowed them to proceed with some coordination, even in their desperate state.
So they weren't sprinting for their lives. They walked about half a kilometer before the trail was just completely covered by new snow.
So the search teams continued in that direction, toward the edge of the forest. I mean, that's the nearest place with any kind of natural shelter from that howling wind.
And it's there, under a big, gnarled cedar tree at the edge of the forest.
Right next to the remnants of a small, improvised campfire. That's where the searchers made their first grim discovery.
The frozen bodies of Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonishenko.
And now we enter the second, much darker phase of this whole discovery, the recovery of the bodies and the forensic findings. This took over 2 months because of the weather.
So let's start with those first two under the cedar. What stood out immediately, beyond just the horror of it, was their clothing.
It was shocking. They were severely, almost impossibly, underdressed for the conditions.
No jackets, no hats, no boots.
No protective pants, no gloves. Doroshenko was found in just a light shirt, underpants, and socks. Krivonischenko was similarly exposed.
And the temperature at the time?
It would have been holding steady around -30 Celsius. That's -22 Fahrenheit. That level of exposure guarantees hypothermia and death within hours, maybe even faster.
It's chilling to think that a decision that took maybe 30 seconds leaving without their gear cost them their lives.
We have to understand the force that made them make that sacrifice. It had to be immediate and visceral.
And the cedar tree itself, it offered more clues, right?
It did. There were signs of damage. Specifically, broken branches up to 5 meters high. This wasn't natural.
Someone climbed it.
Someone climbed it to a considerable height. Why? Maybe scavenging for dry wood high above the snow line.
Or maybe trying to spot the tent.
That's more likely, given the conditions. Trying to spot the tent through the blizzard, maybe hoping to lead a team back to their vital supplies.
And the campfire, even though it was fading, that confirms they were fighting to survive. They were conscious, they were active.
Yes, and that struggle continued. The next 3 bodies were found at different distances between the tent and that cedar tree. They were kind of stretched along the path they'd walked down.
And these 3 were slightly better dressed?
Slightly. They had more layers. In some cases, it looks like they were wearing other group members' clothes, suggesting they were trying to share what little they had.
But still no boots.
Still lacking the essentials. Hats, gloves, and, critically, boots.
And they were all found facing the direction of the tent.
As if they were struggling to return to their shelter at the moment of death. And tragically, all 5 of these initial bodies died of hypothermia. They just froze.
But there's a crucial forensic detail here that gets overlooked, isn't there? When people focus on the injuries of the final 4.
Yes. 4 of these first 5 bodies had died while intoxicated. The medical reports confirm alcohol in their systems.
That fact, combined with the calm footprints, it starts to paint a very specific picture of their state of mind.
If they were mildly intoxicated, it helps explain the lapse in judgment, the confusion, especially when you pair it with an adrenaline-fueled exit from the tent.
Intoxication would just wreck their ability to make good decisions.
Severely.
Yeah.
It would impair their ability to assess risk, gauge distance, retain body heat. It speeds up the effects of the cold. They may have felt warmer than they were or thought the tent was closer than it was.
A tragedy of errors. But the mystery deepens, exponentially when we get to the final 4.
This is where it gets really strange. The physical evidence shifts completely from simple hypothermia to catastrophic blunt force trauma.
These were the 4 found 2 months later, in early May, when the snow started to melt.
They were buried under 3 meters of snow at the bottom of a small hill, 75 meters from the cedar tree, but in the opposite direction from the tent, deeper into the woods, in a ravine.
And that location, the ravine, is absolutely critical to the final theory, isn't it?
It is. The state of these bodies was markedly different. 3 of them, Thibaut Brignol, Zolotarev, and Dubinina, had sustained lethal injuries.
Injuries that the medical examiner, Dr. Boris Vozrozdeny, compared to a car crash?
Explicitly, yes. We're not talking about simple falls here.
What were the specifics?
Thibaut Brignol had a massive fractured skull. Zolotarev and Dubinina both had multiple fractured ribs.
The 2nd through 5th ribs, right?
Exactly. And suffered massive internal bleeding. These were crush injuries, requiring an extreme amount of force, far beyond what a human fist or a standard fall on snow could deliver.
And the examiner was sure about the source of this force.
Yes, he was adamant. Dr. Vozrozdeny said the injuries were from a fall involving extreme pressure or rapid deceleration. And critically, they were not inflicted by another person.
And they happened while the victims were still alive.
Yes. These were the primary cause of death, or at least the disabling factor. They died from trauma, not from the cold.
And then we get to the details that have fueled decades of the most sensational claims.
The severe soft tissue damage.
Zolotarev and Dubinina.
Specifically, Zolotarev and Thibaut Brignol were found with gaping eye sockets, eyeballs absent, and Lyudmila Dubinina. Her tongue was missing. The diaphragm of her mouth was gone.
And those details More than anything else, that's what pushed this case into the realm of the truly inexplicable for so many people.
It is. The fourth person in that final group had a broken nose and a deformed neck, but died of hypothermia like the first five.
So the key takeaway here is just this massive split. We have a group that walks calmly away from a slashed tent.
And then somehow splits into two. 5 who freeze to death with minor injuries.
And 4 who suffer catastrophic, blunt force trauma comparable to a car accident.
It's a disaster that's physically impossible to reconcile with a simple animal attack or a windstorm or even some kind of blast. The trauma is too specific, but the escape was too deliberate.
So what did the official investigation conclude?
Well, on May 28th, 1959, after months of looking into it, the criminal case was officially discontinued. And the report gave a conclusion that has haunted this mystery ever since.
It was cryptic, wasn't it?
The lead investigator, Lev Ivanov, he wrote that the cause of death was an unknown compelling force, which the hikers were unable to overcome.
Unknown compelling force. That phrase is less of a conclusion and more a surrender.
It's a surrender to the ambiguity of the scene. And that vague wording is exactly why this deep dive matters. It's what allowed the whole industry of conspiracy theories to flourish.
Yeti attacks, secret military tests, aliens.
All of it. So we're effectively taking that vague phrase and we're trying to replace it with verifiable, documented forensic facts.
Precisely. And before we get to the most credible explanation in the sources, we have to address those sensational details. The missing tongue and eyes, the radioactivity, the UFOs.
We have to separate myth from medical facts.
So let's start with the most gruesome one, the missing tongue and eyes. This is always pointed to as evidence of some kind of ritual killing or a very specific predator.
Right, something that systematically removed only the soft exposed tissue. But if you look strictly at the medical reports, that whole claim it falls apart.
Right.
Or at least it gets a very clinical explanation.
So what does the report actually say?
It just states, the diaphragm of the mouth and the tongue is missing. The way that was presented initially led people to think it was, surgically removed.
But the medical examiner himself had an explanation.
He did. He had direct access to the body, and he provided a clear clinical reason for these injuries.
And it has to do with where they were found, doesn't it? In that ravine.
Exactly. The official forensic explanation was post-mortem changes, putrefaction and decomposition, to Dubinina's corpse, which was recently exposed to water prior to detection.
Exposed to water. That's the key.
It's a subtle but earth-shattering detail in this case. She and the other 3 were found under meters of snow in a ravine.
So as spring started, that ravine basically became a catch basin for meltwater.
Precisely. And that water accelerated the decomposition. But crucially, it also allowed scavengers, small animals, insects, things that become active in the thaw, to access and remove that soft, exposed tissue, the tongue, the eyes.
So the tongue cavity, especially submerged in cold water, is one of the first things to go.
It is one of the first areas to decompose and be eaten away by natural processes.
That's a huge shift in perspective. So the damage was related to them being found last in a location that was basically a cold water trap. It's an artifact of their discovery, not a clue left by a killer.
Exactly. The examiner added that note, putrefaction and decomposition, to make it absolutely clear this damage was post-mortem. It happened after death. And the sources confirmed this wasn't exclusive to Dubinina. All 4 of the final bodies had damage from the melting snow and decomposition. So the missing tongue moves from a murder mystery clue to just an unavoidable artifact of forensic science in a unique environment.
Okay, that's critical context. What about the other claim? The blood in Dubinina's stomach. People say she had 100 grams of blood, implying some major injury while she was still conscious.
Again, we have to be so precise with the forensic language versus the dramatic retelling. The report actually reads, the stomach contained up to 100 centimeters of a dark red, slimy mass.
100 cubic centimeters? So that's about 10 centiliters, a third of a cup, maybe?
Roughly. And it's a dark red, slimy mass.
Oh.
Not 100 grams of blood. It's likely food mixed with something red, which was most likely blood.
That sounds way less dramatic.
It is. And the difference is significant. It's not pure blood. The volume is small. And most importantly, given that she had suffered massive internal bleeding from those fractured ribs.
Finding some blood in her stomach is not strange at all.
It's medically predictable.
Mm-hmm.
If you have that kind of catastrophic internal trauma, blood often collects in the esophagus and stomach. The amount and the nature of it are just exaggerated to support a more violent theory.
So the gruesome details, the main fuel for the conspiracies, they're explainable by post-mortem and environmental processes.
Not necessarily by a violent external actor. That's the core takeaway here. We've just neutralized the most shocking visual evidence using the medical examiner's own context.
All right, let's move on to the real red herrings. Starting with the radioactive clothing, this is the one that always screams Soviet military cover-up.
And it is one of the most compelling parts, because the evidence is quantitative. It's verifiable in the source material. 3 separate articles of clothing belonging to Kolevatov and Krivonechenko were found to be abnormally radioactive.
How was that contamination measured? What was the standard back then?
The radiological standard in the USSR at the time was pretty clear. A 150 square centimeter area of fabric should not exceed 5,000 disintegrations per minute, or DPM.
That was the safe limit.
Yes. And the 3 contaminated articles, they either equaled or exceeded that limit. One was 5,000 DPM, another 5,600, and the highest reading was 9,900 DPM.
Wow, that's nearly double the limit. It's definitely measurable contamination. So what was the official explanation for this?
Incredibly non-committal, as you might expect from a Soviet report in 1959. It just stated that the contamination happened either because radioactive dust fell from the atmosphere or because the clothes were contaminated when they came into contact with radioactive substances.
So, they didn't know, or they weren't saying.
But here is the critical biographical context that provides a much more plausible, if less dramatic, explanation.
We have to look at the victims whose clothes were contaminated.
Exactly. Krivonechenko had previously worked at a top-secret plutonium production plant. He was involved in making nuclear weapons components. And Kolevatov had worked at a facility developing nuclear materials.
And the 3 radioactive articles belong specifically to those 2 men. That's a massive link.
It is. In the 1950s Soviet Union, occupational safety standards were notoriously lax, especially in high-priority nuclear programs.
So it's plausible they just carried trace elements of contamination on their clothing or gear from their jobs.
Highly plausible. Even probable. They may have just packed a contaminated garment for the trip.
So the contamination was residual from their professional pasts. It wasn't evidence of some secret radiation event on the mountain.
If the whole group had been exposed to an event, we'd expect to find high radiation readings across all 9 bodies and all their items. But it was isolated to just 3 items belonging to 2 men with nuclear industry backgrounds.
It moves squarely into the occupational red herring box.
Exactly. It's a mystery of Soviet industrial history, not a mystery of the mountain itself.
Okay, speaking of red herrings, UFOs. This case is famous for sightings of fireballs or orbs of light in the sky around the time of the disappearance.
It is. And numerous sources claim to see them. 3 soldiers, 2 different hiking groups far away, and then anecdotal reports from the Mansi population and local geologists.
What were these lights described as?
Large, moving orbs or fireballs, visible for anything from a few seconds up to several minutes.
But the problem with these sightings, as the source notes, is the timing, right? Was there any sighting on the actual night of the incident?
Only one other hiking group, about 50 kilometers away, reported seeing an orb of light on that specific night. The others were all before or after.
And then there's the infamous last photo from one of the hikers' cameras.
The blurry photo of a light source taken in the middle of the night.
It's about as undescriptive as it gets.
Exactly. It could be a UFO, or it could be a candle, a flashlight, the campfire, even a reflection of the stove inside the tent. Trying to draw a causal link from that ambiguous photo to the deaths of 9 people is just a massive leap of speculation.
And we have to put it in the context of 1959 Soviet Union.
Absolutely. The middle of the Cold War, the height of the space race, the USSR was aggressively launching rockets and satellites. Aerial activity was intense and often classified.
What could they have seen?
A rocket launch, a piece of a booster, space debris re-entering the atmosphere, a crashing aircraft, maybe a meteor. People back then just lacked the scientific knowledge to identify mysterious aerial lights.
And so the final verdict on the UFO theory.
The sources conclude there's no obvious connection. If a UFO had crash-landed or generated some lethal force, there would have been a massive crash site. Blast evidence, unusual tracks, scorch marks.
And the search teams found none of that. Only footprints leading down the slope.
So the UFO theory is a spooky red herring. It fails to explain the physical evidence inside the tent or the specific types of injuries found on the bodies.
Okay, so we've systematically dealt with the sensational details. The missing tongue is decomposition, the radioactivity is likely occupational, the UFOs are circumstantial. This brings us back to the core, undeniable physical questions. Why did they leave the tent by slashing it? And why did some suffer car crash injuries while others just froze?
And this is where the synthesis provided by your sources really shines. It connects all the dots, the slashed tent, the calm footprints, the intoxication, the fatal injuries, into a single tragic timeline.
the stove, smoke, and ravine fall theory.
Right. And it starts with that immediate threat argument. The theory centers on an immediate threat inside the tent.
And why is that the crucial starting point?
Because of how they escaped. We have to keep going back to the fact that the tent was slashed from the inside.
If the threat was outside, an animal, a yeti, a military team, they wouldn't need to slash the tent.
No, they would have used the zipper door, grabbed their knives, made a calculated retreat. Slashing their only source of survival means the conditions inside were worse than the minus 30 degrees outside.
And the source argues that the only internal danger that would make 9 experienced hikers panic that violently would be something that made it impossible to breathe.
Exactly. And that leads us directly to a unique piece of their equipment, the stove.
The homemade stove built by Dyatlov himself?
Yes, and we know they used it that night because partially eaten fried ham and bacon were found inside the tent. That pipe sticking out of the tent entrance was the exhaust pipe.
So the theory is a catastrophic stove failure, smoke or carbon monoxide poisoning.
Exactly. The most detailed hypothesis suggests that after they finished cooking, they disassembled the stove, removed the exhaust pipe, and settled in for the night. Then, somehow, the embers inside the metal casing reignited. Maybe a gust of wind, maybe someone accidentally kicked it, but without the exhaust pipe in place.
Smoke and carbon monoxide would have filled that small enclosed tent in seconds.
Which would trigger immediate, profound panic. It justifies cutting the tent frantically. They would try to vent it first, maybe cutting small holes at the top. But when breathing became impossible, they slashed the side open to escape the immediate threat of suffocation.
And they escaped in pure panic, severely underdressed.
This panic exit explains why they didn't take time to grab boots or essential layers. Their priority was oxygen, not warmth.
And there's other forensic evidence to support this, right? The burn marks.
Right. Several members were found with minor burn marks on their bodies and clothing. While some attribute this to the campfire later, it could easily be from contact with a scalding hot stove during a frantic, zero-visibility escape.
What about other physiological symptoms?
Some hikers were found with blood around their mouths. Coughing up blood is a recognized symptom of severe smoke inhalation.
And there was photographic evidence that the stove was a hazard even before the final night.
Yes. A photo from the day before shows a jacket that had clearly been burned, possibly by stove sparks. It establishes a precedent. The stove was a known risk.
Okay, so the panic is explained, but let me push back a bit. If the panic subsided once they were outside, we have the calm footprints. Why didn't they immediately go back to the tent for their clothes?
And that's the crucial link. It's resolved by combining 3 factors: the darkness, the storm, and the intoxication.
It's the middle of the night, a snowstorm is raging, temperatures are plummeting.
They're underdressed, maybe disoriented from smoke, and 4 of them are intoxicated. Their judgment was profoundly compromised.
So, in that state, going back to what they might have thought was a still-burning or smoke-filled tent would have seemed more dangerous than heading for the woods.
Precisely. They couldn't stay near the tent. They decided to head for the nearest shelter they knew of, which was the forest, half a kilometer away. A decision that was rational in the moment, but utterly fatal in the long run.
They get to the woods, they try to build a fire under that cedar tree, which is where we found the first 2 bodies.
Doroshenko and Krivonashenko, they sacrificed their lives trying to get that heat going. The broken branches 5 meters up suggest just a frantic, desperate effort to get dry wood.
And the first 2 men simply froze to death trying to maintain that fire.
But the truly lethal event, the one that explains the car crash injuries, happens next. 75 meters from the cedar.
This is where the tragedy shifts from hypothermia to blunt force trauma.
The source proposes that the 4 remaining hikers, who were slightly better dressed and had gone a bit deeper into the woods, triggered a minor avalanche.
This wasn't a huge, mountain-destroying avalanche.
No, it was likely the collapse of an overhanging snow cornice. A lip of snow built up over a hidden ravine. It led to a drop of only about 3 meters.
How does a 3-meter drop cause car crash injuries?
Because of what was at the bottom. The sources emphasize the bottom of that ravine was filled with rocks, hidden ice, and frozen irregular terrain.
So a 3-meter drop onto solid, unforgiving ice?
Especially when you're already compromised by cold, exhaustion, and shock. It results in immense concentrated force. The fractured skulls, the multiple broken ribs, the massive internal bleeding. It all perfectly matches a fall onto a hard, irregular surface.
This explains the huge discrepancy in the cause of death. 5 died of hypothermia.
Because they couldn't get back to the tent or sustain a fire. But 3 died of blunt force trauma, from an accidental catastrophic fall into a hidden environmental trap.
And what about the final pieces of the puzzle, the remaining hikers?
Once the 4 were lost in the ravine, the other 5 were utterly doomed.
3 of them tried to head back up the slope towards the tent.
Dyatlov, Kolmogorova, and Slobodin. They likely realized the cold would kill them if they stayed put. That's why they were found facing that direction. They just succumbed to hypothermia on the way.
And the last 2, Doroshenko and Krivonischenko.
They simply froze to death around the fading fire at the cedar tree.
It's devastatingly logical. The synthesis takes that unknown, compelling force, the mystery, and replaces it with a sequence of tragic yet logical human errors compounded by an unforgiving environment.
Faulty equipment leading to smoke panic, intoxication leading to poor judgment, and a hidden ravine leading to lethal injuries.
That synthesis really is the value of this deep dive. By going through the source material, we filter out the noise and focused on the facts.
We have 2 key shifts in understanding. First, the sensational details, the tongue, the eyes, are explained by post-mortem decomposition in water, not a killer.
And second, that the unknown compelling force was really the 1-2 punch of the faulty stove causing that initial internal panic.
Immediately followed by the accidental fall into the ravine that inflicted the catastrophic injuries in the dark. It led to the group's slow, fragmented demise.
It transforms the official vague conclusion into a series of tragic, preventable accidents. The value for you listening is understanding how a critical analysis of the initial reports, the footprint analysis, the medical examiner's notes, the hiker's employment, lets us distinguish fact from speculation.
Even when the facts themselves seem incredibly bizarre.
That official conclusion. The cause of death was an unknown compelling force. Given the evidence of the faulty stove, the intoxication, and that fatal ravine fall was the true compelling force, less mysterious and more devastatingly human. A confluence of panic, misjudgment, and the sheer brutal indifference of the Siberian environment. What stands out to you after looking at the specific evidence?